First up is Young Woman and the Sea, and this is a biopic about Gertrude Ederle, who you probably haven't heard of. I had not heard of her either. She is a swimmer. She won a gold medal at the 1924 Olympic Games, and in 1926, she became the first woman to swim the English Channel. Now, much like you may not have heard of Gertrude Ederle, I feel like you may not have also heard that this film is coming out. It's very confusing. I think it was originally slated for Disney Plus, and then it got a limited theatrical release, but so it's out in some places. The thing about this film, and the reason I'm confused that it is not necessarily getting amped up, is that it's a good movie. I enjoyed this movie. I think there is a slight challenge in that if you saw Naiad last year with Annette Bening, very similar stories, just because structurally, there's a lot of swimming, there's open water involved. Obviously, you have a female protagonist, so they're both feel-good sports movies, but there's not anything necessarily. I love a good feel-good sports movie, right? Give me a Rudy any day. This is an underdog story. At the time, women's swimming wasn't even really a thing, and to see the way the women were treated, because they're a part of the Olympic team, and yet treated like absolute garbage. So it makes your blood boil a little bit. Daisy Ridley plays Gertrude Ederle, and Daisy really does a great job in this. I believe that she could be a swimmer. Her shoulders are a little svelte for it, but I say this as someone who swims, but is not a professional swimmer or anything like that. But I just have to wonder, what the logic is for kind of keeping this under wraps, but it almost feels like they're maybe secretly trying to set it up as an awards play. Jerry Bruckheimer is the producer of it, so it's confusing, and it feels like they are almost ashamed of it, even though, like I said, it's a pretty decent movie. I enjoyed watching it. I was along with the ride. It does follow a pretty standard set of tropes. Given that it's a biopic, you tend to know how it ends. I won't go into some of the specific details of the things you kind of learn during the movie, because I think those definitely enhance it. And it's always nice to experience extra dimension in a story where you are aware of the outcome. So I thought it did a good job. I'm really confused as to why we're keeping it quiet. Now, do you need to go to a theater to see this film is always a question I ask, because it costs time and money, etc., etc. And because this was originally slated for Disney Plus, there's a very good chance it's going to end up back on there. I am going to say not necessarily. However, it's not like there's a ton of stuff out this weekend, so it's this fine line, weird zone. We're in summer, basically, so the fact that this is the biggest movie coming out this week is a little strange, and the fact that the biggest movie coming out this week from a huge studio is not being pushed aggressively, equally strange. I don't know what Twilight Zone we're living in, but overall, I liked the film. I thought Daisy Ridley was good. I learned something about women's sports history and just sports history in general. It doesn't have to do with gender. It made me angry about the patriarchy and how much further progress we need to make, but overall, a good film. If you feel particularly compelled to go to the movie theater this weekend, I don't see a reason not to see it, but I'm also going to say, if you feel like waiting a little bit and seeing if it comes out on streaming, this is not going to be the one where I'm like, you must go to a theater. Overall, though, I'm going to give it a 3.9 out of 5. The next thing I have is Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, and this is a really complicated one for me. So I absolutely adore Mad Max Fury Road. I think it is in my top action films of all time. I like the original Mad Max saga to a degree, but there is something about Fury Road that just spoke to me, and I thought the filmmaking was brilliant, and simultaneously overstated and understated, and Charlize Theron was great. So when they said they were making a prequel to the Furiosa character, but it wouldn't have Charlize Theron, a bit hesitant. I think Anya Taylor-Joy, who plays younger Furiosa, is an excellent actress. So that did not give me pause necessarily. And then they announced Chris Hemsworth is going to be, and I said, okay, great, I love Chris Hemsworth. I don't think I needed this movie. I am almost sad I personally saw this movie just because it didn't do it for me, and then it made me question my love of Fury Road. And this might be a hyper-specific scenario to me, and I know that this film came out last week, and so there's a good chance if you were already aggressively inclined to see it, you saw it. So, for those folks, sorry I didn't get to in time, but I was traveling, and then I had to ask myself, did this not resonate with me as much, perhaps because I was very jet lagged when I saw it? I don't think that's the case. This is the story of how the character Furiosa gets taken from her kind of idyllic home in a time that is post-apocalyptic. So she was in a place of safety and is taken to a place of not. And then we meet some of the characters from, Mad Max Fury Road. But we don't meet Mad Max. Instead, we get Chris Hemsworth as this Dr. Dementis character who's similar to a Morton Joe, if you are familiar with the Mad Max saga. This is the other thing, right? So the film does technically set it up so you don't have to have seen anything else to see this movie. Now, is this the movie that I would say, you know what, you should drop in here? Absolutely not. I think my frustration with it is that it doesn't add anything to this character who I already have such an affinity for. George Miller was able to speak volumes about this character without showing us much of it in the first film. And so the fact that she gets an entire film and yet it doesn't actually make me feel like I know the character that much better is frustrating. It's also 28 minutes longer than Mad Max Fury Road, which I think is actually to its detriment. And then again, in terms of expectation setting, yes, the stunts are really impressive. The cars are cool, but to me, they weren't cooler than. And I think maybe because we were expecting this level of stunt work and all this stuff, you know, it couldn't live up to the expectations. And sometimes I feel like it's better to leave well enough alone. If you loved the film, I'm so happy for you. Like, I don't want to yuck anyone's yum, but just for me personally, I think I wish I hadn't seen it. Also, Chris Hemsworth, again, I like him in comedic roles, and I think with this, they were sort of trying to play on that, but it's not quite there. And sometimes it feels like characters aren't in the same movie. Oh my God. I am frustrated by this. It's getting good reviews for both audiences and critics. So I am an outlier, and everyone's entitled to their opinion. And I know that there is absolutely filmmaking prowess being on display. You know, I think Anya Taylor-Joy is good in the role, but it's tough when somebody like a Charlize Theron originates it and does so much with so little. You know, Anya Taylor-Joy also, there's not a ton going on. I almost wish she'd just gotten her own story as like another Imperator. Like, she didn't need to be Furiosa. Give me the stories of other people who live in this world. Like, that would have been preferable to me. So because I didn't find it compelling, I honestly found the plot a little bit boring. Like, I was just not invested in it. And you know, a lot of it just feels like it gets telegraphed because it's a prequel, so you like know certain people are not going to be seen again as far as we know. I just couldn't get into it. So I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. That's being generous only because I love George Miller and I love Mad Max. I'm probably inflating it a bit, but you know, the good thing is, I think if Fury Road were to come on, I'd still watch it in a heartbeat, but I do not need to see Furiosa again. And then the last thing I have this week is a new Netflix docuseries, and it is called Dancing for the Devil, the 7M TikTok Cult. And because I was not aware of this cult, and because I am generally not on TikTok super actively, I assumed 7M meant that 7 million TikTokers were in this cult. I was wrong. 7M is a management company that is affiliated with a church with a sketchy pastor. So this docuseries goes into the details of how this pastor basically recruited some of the top TikTok dancers into his management company and then kind of also lured them into a cult. Now, I don't think this is a spoiler per se, but I'm going to give you a heads up that this is one of those Netflix docuseries that doesn't have a resolution yet. So I would not be surprised if we see a season 2, but if you are going into this expecting a full, comprehensive story, you know, you're not going to get that here because it is ongoing. Sometimes that can be more interesting. And it's also one of those odd scenarios where because there has to be amount of time with post-production and, you know, filming, wrapping versus the release, like even if you turn it around super quickly, the story has progressed in real life. And because so much of this is centered around social media, you can continue to read up about it, right? Like you will be able to find information about what has happened after. I did do a quick check. We don't have a resolution yet. So back to the actual docuseries. It's interesting because it's following two different kind of wakes of destruction of this cult and this pastor. You know, there's the pre-TikTok social media, less visible abuse effectively that's happening. And then there's these highly visible characters. And part of me wonders that if this dude had not recruited people in the really public eye, would he have been continuing to get away with stuff? So in that sense, and this documentary brings this stuff outside of TikTok, because if you're someone like me who's, again, aware of TikTok, but definitely not in the dance corner of TikTok, so I had no idea who the protagonists are. This centers around a few families who have been impacted by this, and some of them are trying to get their children out of this cult, and some of them are, you know, adults who have escaped this cult. And there are several stories involved, and you may gravitate towards one type of storyline over the other, but I do think it does a pretty decent job of interweaving the various folks who've been impacted and their ongoing stories in a way that you never spend too much time with one person before you jump to the next. And so even if you are not necessarily as invested in a certain part of it, it keeps it moving. So basically what I'm saying is it's a well-paced documentary. I, again, did not know anything about this, so I can't speak to, is this telling the story or the whole story that's available online? And obviously no documentary can tell the whole story that's available online. One of the other things I should note that because it's ongoing, etc., there's not exactly active participation from anybody currently involved in the cult, which is to be expected from, this scenario. But sometimes when you watch something that has come out later, after something is resolved, or hopefully people are convicted or something along those lines, you get to hear their perspective of it. So it is one-sided in that sense. I will note that, but I'm not calling it out as a criticism, just something to be aware of. I found it fascinating, morbidly so. That's the case with a lot of these crime docuseries, right? So if this is your genre, honestly, there's a good chance you've already watched it because it's been out for a day and a half already, but I do recommend it. It is interesting. I'm curious to see how it plays out. It is out streaming now on Netflix.